Then let's be together with our gospel lesson today, Luke 21, 5 through 19, New Revised Standard Version. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." And they asked him, "Teacher, when will this be, and what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go with them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and prosecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. For I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." May God add his insight into his holy word.
Have you ever uttered the phrase, "Oh, come on now, it's not the end of the world"? See, we usually reserve this for someone who's upset over something that we consider trivial. We'll often say this to people who've experienced disappointment. We say this to our kids. We say, "I know you're upset that you didn't make the basketball team, but it's not the end of the world, is it?" Now, see, I'm not a big fan of that phrase because, exactly. And the reason why is it minimalizes that person's feelings, because for them, it may not be the end of the world, but for them, in that time, in that moment, it feels like it. So I'm not a big fan of that. And yet we still use it, right? We still use that phrase. Now, the end of the world is a pretty serious thing, isn't it? Right? Or at least it seems like it. Of course, we watched Don't Look Up and Faith in Films a couple of months ago, and they didn't take things seriously, even when they were facing the inevitable. I don't know. What I do know, however, is that from the beginning of recorded history, we have been somewhere between fascinated and obsessed with the last days, with the idea that the world could be coming to an end. Because, if you think about it, there's been a lot of historical events that have been interpreted as a sign that the world may come to the end, that we might be in our last days on earth. Think about in the 17th century in Europe, we had the bubonic plague. People were sure that the bubonic plague was a sign that the world was coming to an end. And then, speaking of Don't Look Up, let's talk about comets, because on two occasions during the 18th century, during the 1700s, the physicist and mathematician John Bernoulli and a theologian named William Whiston believed that a comet was on a collision course with Earth. This is before calculators and computers, right? And then, in the 1700s, on May 20th, 1773, the whole city of Paris went into a panic because they misunderstood something that astronomer Jerome Lalande said about comets in a lecture he made. And then when Halley's Comet made an appearance in the skies in 1910, another French astronomer, Camille Flammarion, predicted that the comet would impregnate the atmosphere and possibly snuff out all life on the planet. So, not wanting to miss out on the chance to make some money, there were some shady opportunists who started selling comet pills because they were supposed to make humans immune to the toxic gases that the comet would inevitably bring to the Earth. And then in the early 20th century, Hunger Games, Blade Runner, Watchmen, anything that Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer, ever wrote. And I suppose zombie stories would fit into this category too. So I can add World War Z, The Walking Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Left 4 Dead, and 28 Days Later to that list. And you might be thinking, but why, Jesse? They're so dark and they rarely end well. I know, right? It's entertaining. There's just something fascinating about an entire genre that ponders the question, how would humans respond to a catastrophic event that could eliminate humanity as we know it? See, back when Walking Dead was actually a good TV show, Gwen Jocelyn and I concluded that the show really wasn't about how awful zombies were. It was about how awful humans can be. The zombies were just window dressing. Maybe the reason why this genre fascinates me so much has to do with my hope in humanity, that we can be better as humans. Because the authors of all these apocalyptic dystopian stories use this genre kind of as a cautionary tale to humanity. It's like, don't go down that road. Don't mess things up. But even if you do, there is hope, because in the end, there are heroic people who can rise above the turmoil and overcome the evil that brought us to the edge of destruction in the first place. Or zombies can just eat everyone and the credits roll like in Dawn of the Dead, right? It's all entertaining. I love it. So our text this week includes some images that seem apocalyptic. This takes place right after Jesus entered Jerusalem for the last time. In 1 week, he will be arrested by the corrupt Jewish religious leaders, and he will be crucified by the Roman government. In this passage, Jesus and some of his disciples were touring Herod's temple in Jerusalem. It was the centerpiece of Jerusalem. And that was a pretty bold move for them to be there, because not long before that, Jesus made a big scene there. He was overturning the money changers' tables in the temple, and he was declaring that the temple had become a den of robbers. And then he began teaching about how corrupt structures of power, especially those that were related to the temple, can come about. And so what are his disciples doing? They're going around going, ooh, look at this. This is so pretty. There's statues and all this beautiful stonework. Blessed are the clueless, because they'll be called disciples, right? So Jesus turned around and he caught them saying this. He caught them saying, oh, look at how pretty everything is. And Jesus says, you think these stones are impressive? You wait, because there will come a day when not one stone will be left unturned. Nothing will be left standing. And the disciples said, whoa, wait a minute. When is this going to happen? And will there be any warning signs? And this is where Jesus goes all dystopian, apocalyptic on them. But not in the way that you'd expect. He said, you want to know what's going to happen? Okay, fine. There'll be wars. There'll be insurrections, earthquakes, famine, disease, signs in the sky. Those are the things that are going to happen. You want to know when? Well, first, there's going to be persecution. And then you'll be handed over to the synagogues and the kings and the government. And you're going to go to prison in my name. You'll have a chance to testify, but to no avail. Because there will be discord among your families, discord among your friends. You will be hated because of my name, and some of you will even be executed. Now, I'm sure his disciples thought, oh my word, what's going on here? They were kind of shocked by what Jesus was saying, because, Jesus never said following him was going to be easy, but what he's talking about here just seems so extreme. Sounds kind of like the end of the world. Yeah, it sure does. So here's the thing. The Jerusalem temple was destroyed in 66 of the Common Era, used to be known as AD. In 66, the Jewish population rebelled against the Romans. And then 4 years later, Emperor Titus comes rolling into Jerusalem with his armies and destroys the temple along with most of Jerusalem. That happened in August of 70, Common Era, 4 decades after what happened with Jesus and his disciples when he made this prediction from our scripture this morning. So Luke's gospel was written somewhere between 80 and 90 in the Common Era, which means the first readers of Luke's gospel were at least 10 years past the destruction of the Jewish temple. But they were still reeling from the shock of that event. What happened to them must have felt like what we felt like after the destruction of the World Trade Center in 2001. Many of these people felt helpless, they felt hopeless, they felt lost, and they felt abandoned by God. This past Tuesday was the 4th anniversary of the Camp Fire, which destroyed most of the city of Paradise and many other homes in the mountain communities of eastern Butte County. The trauma of that event is still fresh on many people's minds, especially the ones who barely escaped that fire or who lost their homes and many of their possessions. Although, anybody who lives in the West Coast mountain communities know that the possibility of wildfires exist, it doesn't make an event like this any less traumatic. Same goes for people who live in Gulf Coast communities where a hurricane could cause as much damage. This hurricane season has been rough. This is like people who live in the Midwest where tornadoes can just come out of nowhere and destroy a community. It's like people who live in areas that are prone to flooding and to mudslides. The possibility of catastrophic events is always there, but it's still traumatic when it does happen. This is true with other events that Jesus mentioned. Ask the people of Ukraine about the trauma that wars and insurrections bring. Heck, ask people in Washington, D.C., The possibility is always there, even if it's remote, but it's still shocking for the people on the front lines when tragedy occurs. We're all kind of on edge these days, right? And for a lot of reasons. We live in an era of insecurity and unrest. Academics use the term VUCA, V-U-C-A, to describe times in history that seem, here's what VUCA means, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Some would say that's where we are right now. But there are also those who remind us that every era of human history has experienced VUCA times. And then there are also those who suggest that we flip things around and face the world with vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. In other words, redefine VUCA. So here's the point that I believe Luke was trying to make by including this story of Jesus and his time in the temple with his disciples, especially when he knew that his readers were living in the trauma and aftermath of the temple's destruction. I believe Luke was trying to flip things around and make it clear that the destruction of the temple was not evidence of God's rejection or disfavor. Rather, it was a fulfillment of God's plan and something that could actually inspire vision, understanding, clarity, and agility, or at the very least, the expectation of hope. Or to put it another way, what might bring terror can cause trust or result in trust. Jesus said these things would happen. So even though it appears God's plan and work had been undermined, it really wasn't. See, God is still in charge. God is faithful. And so Luke's audience then is encouraged to remain faithful too. See, discipleship is not about avoiding this time of trial and persecution, because persecution often comes with following Jesus. And so no institution, not even one as grand as the temple, Herod's temple, can protect us from this. This passage isn't about doom and gloom. It's about faith and endurance through tough times and struggles. See, don't think that the end of the temple is a clear sign of the end of the world. That's what they were trying to say. This is not the end of the world, even though it seems like it. Yes, the institution took a big hit. Yes, it seems like everything is crumbling all around you, and it may even continue to crumble. But that's because there is still work to be done. See, this passage is a reminder that even though the institution appeared to be crumbling all around them, and even though there was going to be all sorts of cosmic and familial crises, faith and endurance abound. Why? Because faith and endurance are the marks of true discipleship, which is needed because, again, there is still so much work to be done. And we as disciples, we're ready for that. If we aren't, this is why we're here.